safety of your homes on this Saturday afternoon. I'd like to firstly introduce you to myself. I'm Dr. Michelle Kelly, and I'm from the School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Newcastle. I'd also like to introduce my co-host today, which is Dr. Alex Callan from the School of Environmental and Life Sciences at the University of Newcastle. And in a moment, I'll also introduce Frini, who will be doing our talk today. So we would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today. The Awabakal Nation, Darkinjun Nation, Yirrapai Nation, Warramai, Wanaru, and Eora Nation. We also like to pay respect to the wisdom of our elders past, present, and emerging. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Frini Karayanidis. Frini is a good colleague of mine, and she has worked at the School of Psychological Sciences at the University of Newcastle for more than 20 years, and which tells us that she's an expert at what she does. Frini is going to talk to you today about how to continue to maintain your brain health as you become older and wiser. Frini has been doing work in aging, and particularly maintaining your cognitive or your thinking health into your older years for quite a few years now, and she has collaborators all over the country and all over the world who help her with this research. Her research spans from sort of adolescence all the way into older adulthood, which really allows her to see how the brain changes over time with development, but also to have a good understanding of what helps maintain and protect our brain health as we get older. So just to let you know today, if you would like to ask any questions, you'll see a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can click on that and type any questions as we're going along today. I will monitor that, and if it's appropriate, I'll either jump in with that question at the time, or we will save the question for a little bit later. We'll just see how we're going. If you have any questions or need to get in touch with us as your hosts, you also have a chat function down the bottom there, and you can send us a message directly to the hosts, and we can help you out if you're having any difficulties. So Frini, I'd like to hand over to you now if you'd like to share your screen with us.
Thank you, Michelle. Okay, firstly, thank you very much, Michelle and Alex, for inviting me to give this talk. Would have been lovely to do it in person down at Newcastle Museum, but you know, we're all, as you said, safe, and that's what's important. So next year. Thank you for the introduction, Michelle. I had an introduction slide, but I won't ponder on it for long. Other to say that my current research focus, which has been probably over the last 20 years or so, is in promoting and maintaining healthy brain and mind across the lifespan. I won't talk about our research projects, although I come back to looking at how they fit into the presentation I'm making today at the end, and I'd be happy to discuss questions. So we'll, in order to increase a little bit of your participation, and also to get you thinking about some of the topics that we're discussing today, I'd like to just have a few little quizzes. Alex or Michelle, is that up? I can't see if it is up.
Yes, that's perfect, Frini.
Sorry, it is on?
Yes, it sure is. We can see your slide.
Oh, okay, fantastic. So we can leave the poll on for a little while, and I'll start talking, and maybe towards the end we can come back and have a look at some of those results. Michelle and Alex, I'll have to rely on you to save those. Oh, there it is. I can see it now. To save those results for discussion. So Today's talk is subtitled The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. And those of you in my generation and above will remember the reference. I wanted to put the music to that, but technology would have probably stuck things up. And we'll start backwards. We'll start with the ugly, because aging does have a lot of negative stereotypes. We talk about the aging problem, the silent epidemic, the burden on the nation's budget and health systems and social systems. And generally, older people are portrayed in the media, social media, as frail and needy and grumpy and senile, with the boomers, and dependent, seen as not, older people are seen as not contributing to society, and the perception that aging is a direct path towards dementia. Why is this? Well, we do live in a Western society that doesn't explicitly value older adults. We don't live in extended groups, so many young people don't have close relationships with older people. And we have stereotypes. We need stereotypes to help us deal with complexity by putting people into boxes. So in response to boomers, we call young people millennials, or whatever other categories we use. Now, the good news is that Australian life expectancy is increasing. We were living up to 72 years on average in 1960s. We're up to 83 years in 2020. This is still, the gap for Indigenous Australians is very large, but generally the change reflects improved sanitation, housing, education and medicine. But that also means that there are more people living with dementia, and that will increase, is predicted to increase from 2020 into 2030. And the question is that, you know, what are the benefits of the advanced increase in life expectancy as opposed to the number of people with dementia? Now, it's important to understand that dementia is not caused by age. The neuropathological effects that are associated with a group of disorders that are called dementias includes very specific neuropathologies that are linked to Alzheimer's disease, such as these amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles, as well as a range of changes in our brain's white and grey matter, which include, which are associated with small vessel disease and cardiovascular health. But there is no one brain pathology or genetic factor that can fully predict dementia. Dementia risk is associated with a number of different risk factors at different times of our life. So it's not, and these are not just risk factors that affect old age. In fact, different factors impact dementia risk at different stages of life. Some of them are non-modifiable, your age and your family history, but many of them are modifiable. What are the modifiable risk factors? Well, a study in 2020, or a review of the literature in 2020, showed that there are key modifiable risk factors at different times of our lives, starting with early life education. We're hearing loss and traumatic brain injury, hypertension, alcohol, obesity in midlife, smoking, depression, social isolation, and so on in late life. Together, these account for about 40% of the modifiable risk factors. But then there's another 60% that is still remains unknown. So coming to the not so bad, in fact, most older people do not fit the typical aging stereotype. When we look at subjective measures of quality of life and control for a whole lot of extraneous factors like health and financial situation and so forth, quality of life tends to improve from our 50s to our late 60s. It remains largely stable then until our mid-20s before it declines. Depression is less prevalent in older adults, and many older people remain physically and mentally active and can continue to contribute to their family and their social environment. In fact, most older people do not develop dementia. So while dementia risk increases with age, the proportion of older people who have dementia, develop dementia, is less than 5% for people under 74, is less than 10% for people 75 to 84, and increases in the older age range for people over 85 years of age. And even amongst those who do develop dementia, the symptoms progress very slowly for most people, and many people with dementia continue to live well and have meaningful lives for many years after their diagnosis. Now, I will be talking about this concept of healthy aging or aging well. And I thought I'll spend a little bit of time sort of characterizing what does it mean to age well? What do we mean? What is the profile for people who do not, for the majority of people who do not develop dementia? Now, we know that aging is associated with wear and tear in both our body and our mind. Joints become stiffer, our hair becomes grayer, but healthy aging is associated with a set of processes that occur naturally with increasing age in the absence of any specific disease diagnosis like dementia, like Parkinson's disease, stroke, and so forth. So what are the abilities that are retained and what are the abilities that decline in terms of cognitive health? If we look at cross-sectional cohorts, that is, we compare people at different age groups, people in their 20s, people in their 40s and 60s and so forth, we tend to see that many abilities decline very rapidly or continuously rather across the lifespan, whereas others remain largely intact, continue to improve and then are retained. One of the key factors that does, or abilities that does progressively decline is psychomotor speed. The time it takes you to analyze information, reach a decision, and translate it into a response. Fluid abilities, such as the ability to make reasoned judgments, reach decisions, solve problems, manipulate information in your head, flexibly adapt to change in a rapid and efficient way, tend to become progressively slower, poorer, whereas crystallized abilities, those abilities that we have accumulated over our lifespan, like our knowledge of the world, our ability to manipulate information, numbers in a simple way, our language skills, our procedural knowledge, how to ride a bike, our autobiographical knowledge, who we are, what our life history was, and so forth, these tend to remain intact. But interestingly, when you look at longitudinal cohorts, then the change is different. In fact, I think I've made a mistake there because longitudinal cohorts show a progressive development rather than a progressive decline across the lifespan. So psychomotor speed, this green line, perceptual speed, still tends to progressively decline, but our fluid abilities and our crystallized abilities remain relatively stable and then decline in later age. So when we compare a person's performance against their own ability as a younger person, the age-related decline is less dramatic and emerges much later. What is it that produces these cognitive changes, whether they occur relative to younger people or relative to ourselves? Well, healthy aging, the aging that is not associated with disease, is associated with very similar neuropathological changes as dementia, but at a much lower severity. Brain changes most prominently involve the prefrontal cortex, this front part of your brain that many people for many years thought doesn't have much to do with anything. It's our spare brain. But in fact, for those of you who remember Thomas the Tank Engine, can be thought of as the fat controller. The person or the homunculus, this conceptualization of the system that controls all the other parts of our brain. What do our frontal lobes do? They support these executive functions, our ability to set goals for ourselves and stay on track to achieve them, our ability to make decisions and rapidly adapt those decisions as circumstances change, to solve problems, to realize when we made an error and correct it, to control our impulses, to forego an immediate reward in favor of a later goal. How do these changes affect our everyday life? Well, a lot of our everyday life involves making decisions under pressure. When we're driving, we have to make a decision about whether we brake because the light is about to turn red or whether we continue driving. When to change lane, how to complete a complex task, whether it's solving a puzzle or whether it's cooking a meal. They affect our ability to stay on task, to avoid getting distracted or to lose our train of thought, such as forgetting food on the stove. If the phone rings, we get distracted, we forget to come back. Filtering impulsive behavior, those comments and gestures that our grandkids just do not appreciate, and next time we repeat them, or anticipating the consequences of our behavior. So you want to climb on that ladder to fix the roof tiles without necessarily anticipating that your body is not necessarily as balanced as it used to be, and that may create an accident. But as we age, we also tend to opt for accuracy over speed. So we adapt ourselves to these changes that happen in our brain and our executive functions. We tend to take time to plan ahead and anticipate potential snags. And we also tend to check and recheck a decision, which makes us slower in deciding, hence the increase in our psychomotor speed. When we look at our real world statistics, so these are annual fatalities over in New South Wales in 2000 to 2004, they're old now, but there'll be similar outcomes. People in their 70 to 85-year-old years tend to have a greater risk. There's an increase, a bump in the risk of serious or fatal car crashes. There's higher fatality rate that tends to happen at complex intersections, which require this quick thinking and decision-making, or driving off the road, due often to distraction. These, the rates of accidents tend to be compounded by medical issues, so poor vision or poor cognition. But then if you look at the relative rate of annual fatalities in these older people, as opposed to the younger people, I'd much rather hitch a ride with your grandmother than with your teenage son. So yes, there are problems, but they're not even as high. The rate is not even as high as in 30 to 40-year-olds. Now, at the same time, 30 to 40 and 50-year-olds are driving a lot more than 70 and 80-year-olds. And this loss of impact, both the fatalities have a huge impact on the person themselves and the families and other people involved in the accident, but they also, increasing age often leads to a loss of license, which itself impacts a person's lifestyle in many ways, their independence and mobility, social connectivity, and people's self-esteem, because we are a nation that drives, especially in Australia. Most of us drive to get around. Now we're talking about the aged as if it is one category, as if everybody ages at the same rate. But in fact, there are many parts of aging. There is large variability between older people in which cognitive processes are affected and the degree to which they decline. Some older people, in fact, roughly a third, belong to each of these categories, will retain their cognitive abilities largely intact throughout their lifespan. Some will show slow and progressive changes in some cognitive abilities, especially these executive functions that we discussed before. And some will show substantial cognitive decline and may eventually meet criteria for a dementia diagnosis. This is represented here, these three pathways, if you like, are represented here in this graphic. So you've got increasing age starting roughly at midlife, if you like, and you've got level of cognitive functioning on this axis. If we were to assume that this is the threshold for clinical dementia, our aim is to keep older people, or indeed all people, above this line for as long as possible. The aim is to ensure that people live their life and do not reach this threshold before they die of other causes, before our lifespan is over. Now, you can see here a dramatic decline, and that can happen because of major insults, stroke, brain trauma, other things that really impact, or even severe neurological diseases. And one of the main aims is to reduce the risk of these major neurodegenerative conditions or vascular ischemic events that drop our ability, suddenly bringing it much closer to this threshold for clinical dementia. But interestingly, most of us, and thankfully, most of us don't experience a brain insult. Nevertheless, at some point in time, there's this divergence between people who stay on the high path, I will be calling it, versus start moving towards the low path. And a key question in both dementia research and aging research is to identify and avoid the factors that set us on this low path. Now, the bad news is that there are many overlapping risk factors between dementia, heart disease, stroke, and age-related cognitive decline. So all of these factors that affect dementia risk, affect heart disease and stroke, also affect our chances of declining, of our cognition declining with increasing age. And as you will see, they range from this non-modifiable age, but also to a whole lot of other things that we can do things about. Generally, if we have a single risk factor, our risk is low for all these conditions, but also for age-related cognitive decline. But the more we can tick off, the greater the risk. What sets us on the low road? Well, many of these risk factors directly affect the brain's vascular system. Now, there's one path of nutrition that comes to our brain, and if we stuff that up, then clearly our brain doesn't get the nutrition it needs. So it's very important to keep our brain's vascular system healthy. There are many types of damage that can happen to our arterial system, which provides the resource-rich blood to our brain, to our atherosclerosis and arteriosclerosis, and these are linked to cardiovascular risk factors. Atherosclerosis is the buildup of gunk, essentially, inside our arteries, which reduces the blood, it restricts the way the blood can flow, and it can also cause clots. And arteriosclerosis refers to how thick and non-pliable the walls of our arteries become, because that impacts how well the blood can flow through. Coming back to the good news, is that addressing any of these risk factors reduces your risk not only for dementia, but also for these other factors. So reducing our risk factors, ticking some of these, removing our ticks for some of these, can have significant impact on our brain health, our cognitive health, and also our risk for dementia. So just for our little break and have a second little poll. In an optimal world, what would make aging well more achievable for yourself or for your loved ones? So which one of the below would be more helpful? Better healthcare, more aged care facilities, accessible local community services to remain at home but connected, or financial and housing security. We can keep that poll running for a little while. And I'll just leave there for a minute so that people get a chance. I think I ran through it a bit too quickly. I'll continue and then so now reaching the good. Well, the good is that we can improve our chance of aging well, that most risk factors are modifiable and that there are many protective factors. So we can invest in aging well at any time across our lifespan, but even if we didn't invest in childhood and younger adulthood, we can still benefit from late investments. So not only can we avoid the factors that set up on our path, on our lower path, early in life or in midlife, but we can actually find ways to return on that higher path by changing our habits in later life. How can we stay on the high road? Well, number one is reduce our risk factors. We'll discuss that a bit. I said some of them are not modifiable, but the vast majority are modifiable. Some of these we can hit with a single stone by improving our sleep, by reducing obesity, by improving our diet, increasing our exercise. We can cross off hypertension and stop not smoking, cross off hypertension, cholesterol problems, diabetes, heart disease. So there's lots of things that we can do by just addressing a few aspects of our life. And the more risk factors we eliminate, the greater our chances of staying on that high road. In addition, we can increase the protective factors. What are protective factors? They are factors that reduce the likelihood of disease or increase the likelihood of well-being. And in the area of aging and dementia, they include many of these same things that form risk factors: increasing our activity and exercise, increasing cognitive engagement, increasing our education levels as a younger person or continuing to be educated as an older person. Maintaining employment or engagement in work in some capacity, social engagement, engagement in creative arts, being bilingual or learning new languages. All of these accumulate what we call our mental capital. You might have heard of cognitive reserve, neural reserve, mental capital. All of these refer to more or less a similar construct. So what is our mental capital? It's that collection of physical, cognitive, emotional, and social resources that contribute to our quality of life. It's the total sum of our positive and negative impacts across our life course. This is a complex figure, and don't bother trying to read it. It's basically intended to show that from the moment we are conceived, our genetic endowment, all through our prenatal, childhood, adolescence, adult and old adulthood, we accumulate this mental capital, this cognitive reserve, a set of cognitive abilities. And across our lifespan, there are negative influences like the risk factors and positive influences like the protective factors that either increase our mental capital or dull the amount that we have. And different experiences or different opportunities impact that mental capital across our lifespan. Some of them having effects very widely across many different ages and stages. The mental capital is built through our life course, through social investment policies and programs. So it's not just up to us ourselves, it's the opportunity we have for education, it's the health services that we have access to, it's our abilities for early intervention, becoming aware of medical or cognitive conditions and addressing them early, drug and alcohol services, housing, social services, and so forth. So it's not just up to us, it's part of the environment that we live in. And the other thing to notice is that towards the end of our life, we have accumulated a whole lot of mental capital, and it may start to decline, but at any point in time, there's always this reserve. And often this investment that society has placed in our mental capital is wasted as people's abilities remain untapped because of the way that we live and because of the way that our structure, our Western structures essentially tend to be organised. How can we optimise the road to living well? Coming back to just concluding on this set of slides, it said to improve late life outcomes, we need to reduce risk factors, simply look after your cardiovascular health. We can increase protective factors, which again impact cardiovascular, because that's what provides the nutrition to our brain as well as the rest of our body. In addition, it's important to look after our mental health, stay mentally and socially engaged, do activities that you enjoy. I get a lot of people saying, is Sudoku good for you? Do you enjoy Sudoku? If you do, do it. If you don't, why waste such good grey cells? Make new friends, make new habits, work with younger people, because that also forces you to learn new things. So stay physically and mentally active, continue learning through activities that you enjoy, whether it's languages, music, arts, dance, travel in another world. Continue skilled or unskilled working. And a lot of older people do a huge amount of unpaid labour. And stay socially engaged through your activities. Okay, our third poll. What types of activities would you or would you engage in to promote ageing well? So if we can get the poll up, which one of the below would you select? Physical exercise like running, walking, tennis, dancing, internally focused activities such as yoga, meditation, Pilates, mentally stimulating activities such as Sudoku or brain games, caring for family, child-minding, cooking, helping with daily routines, or community involvement such as volunteering, mentoring, joining a choir, and so forth. Give you a minute to go through that. Okay. We will have plenty of time for questions, so I'm very happy. Usually speak for too long. So looking at the barriers to ageing well, we discussed a little bit about the risk factors, but there are other barriers. There are social and societal barriers. Typically, there are lots of financial barriers. People over 65, Australians over 65, 25% of them are living under the poverty line, and 80% rely on at least partly on aged pension. People over 55 find it hard. 20% report that age was a barrier to finding work. Socioeconomic status and work barriers are even greater in Indigenous Australians than amongst our culturally and linguistically diverse Australians. There are geographical and mobility barriers. Australia is a huge country. We have fewer social programs and services in rural and regional areas, and that's often where our Indigenous populations are. And even within urban centres, we have transport difficulties because we rely so much on personal transport. There are cultural barriers because the existing programs, and there are many existing programs that are targeted to the mainstream, they frequently involve language barriers, and there's not careful consideration or sufficient resources to address cultural differences and make the programs culturally appropriate across different groups. Perhaps one of the biggest barriers is that we are preaching to the choir. Most of you here today are people who are engaged, who are interested, who probably know everything I've said already. So the people with the greater need for attention are less likely to engage. They're less likely to be to seek help. They're less likely to know the factors that are impacting their health, their cognitive health, and what they can do about it. And there's also this, I've framed this one because that's the sort of things that we are interested in, the work that we are doing is interested in. There's a lack of evidence base. There was a list of activities that you can do before and that people do engage in. But what activities are most effective? How early should I start engaging in? How often? How much? Is one, if I go to a choir for 10 weeks, have I saved my brain from aging? How are these programs designed and how effective are they? How can we improve them? And how can we integrate them into our daily living? Because often we have the best intentions of doing these things and then life gets in the way. Fortunately, I'm not going to give you answers, but I'm happy to discuss them. Discuss options, because we don't have the answers to these things. We can talk a bit about the type of work that we're doing in these areas. So our final poll for the day, and then I'll discuss a little bit about the work that we are doing, and then we'll open for Q&A. What are the barriers to aging well for yourself or for your loved ones? Which one of them is the greatest barrier? Financial issues, low income, insecurity, making ends meet, physical health, mobility, illness, physical fatigue, mental health, just tiredness, mental fatigue, emotional barriers, not having the energy to go out and do things, or the physical environment, inability to access transport, accessibility of activities within your local area, so that you can walk there or find your way. So what are we doing in our research group? And that includes Michelle, who we're collaborating on a number of projects together. So the research program that I'm involved in is looking at evidence-based approaches to aging well. One of the questions that I'm specifically interested in is identifying early markers of emerging arterial, brain, and cognitive changes. That point, that sweet point at which the high and low paths diverge, and picking up people just as they're heading down towards the low path so that we can easily bring them back onto the high path. Now, why there? Typically, when we look at dementia, the way that a person is diagnosed with dementia, their family would have noticed changes happening over a number of years. They're a bit more forgetful. They're not following the rules when you're playing Monopoly with them. They're just making these little mistakes that you think, Dad never used to do that. Dad was always more sensitive about that. By the time we get those changes happening and the family notices them, and they go to the GP does the blood tests and everything else, if there's something else wrong, and they go to, refers them to a specialist, they go to the specialist, we're talking months. And even after the first formal assessment, it may be a good year before a diagnosis is given. By that time, those changes have been progressing. So if all we rely on is currently on someone in the family noticing and prodding the person to go for help, we might be wasting 1, 2, 3 valuable years. If we can develop either cognitive measures, brain-related measures, arterial-related measures that tell us that there is an emerging cause for concern, then we can fast-track that process and encourage people or support people for lifestyle changes that will reduce their risk or delay the onset of dementia. Now, we already have a lot of markers, all of those risk factors. We know that hypertension and obesity and all of that that we spoke about before, we know that those are early markers. So we know that people should be supported to remove those risk factors. But not all of us do, and that's not enough for all of us. So being able to have, just like we have our blood pressure measures and our blood measures for cholesterol and so forth, if we had tests that would allow us to see how well, without necessarily very expensive tests, but at your GP, how well your arterial system is supplying your brain, and if early changes, then that would give an even earlier impetus for change. In fact, even before hypertension develops. So that's one part of work that we're doing. Another part is building evidence-based behavioural and lifestyle interventions to build mental capital, to bring people back to the high path, and be able to identify what are those components of those interventions that can then guide the development of programs, whether they're lifestyle programs, whether they're creative arts activities, whether they're exercise programs. So at the moment, we have a lot of programs. Many of them make people feel happy and they improve quality of life in that way, but we don't know what impact they have on brain and cognition. The third is to target these lifestyle interventions to people who need them the most and at the earliest possible time. And that's a big challenge because, as we said before, we tend to preach to the converted. And the fourth is to customize those interventions for specific areas of decline that occur in different people and for specific cultural and social groups. Probably our work at the moment is focused on the first two more than the others, but that's the pathway. So this approach of customizing is equivalent to personalized medicine that we have in cancer, for example. Personalize our lifestyle interventions to people that need them in the way they need them. Okay. Finally, that's it from me. I'd like to thank you for listening. Thanks, Michelle and Alex, for inviting me, and acknowledge both my own team and also my many collaborators and funding sources. And if there's anything that we don't manage to discuss today, feel free to send me an email to my personal email or to the Activate study.
Thank you.
Stop sharing, Michelle?
Maybe, I don't think there's any questions based on, maybe leave them up there for a second, just in case there's any questions that refer to one of your slides.
Yeah.
But first, I'd like to thank you very much for that presentation today. It was very interesting, and I learned something new as well, in my own area. We do have a few comments and also a few questions. So I might go to the first question first. So where do you see spiritual factors impacting people? For example, unforgiveness. So
that's a very interesting question, and one I must say I have not thought of. So I will have to be very fast on my feet at the moment. Look, spiritual factors, the part of, if you like, the specific one that you refer to, unforgiveness. it becomes part of our mental load. Okay, spirituality improves our mental well-being, and holding grudges creates a huge mental load that we have to deal with. So negativity, negative thoughts, negative emotions, negative feelings towards others are a burden. And our spiritual world, whether it's through organized religion or through spirituality more generally, and ethics and morality, makes us better people and calmer with ourselves. I don't know how well I've answered that, but Philip, feel free to put another question.
Yeah, so absolutely. So everyone can put questions now in the Q&A. That's where we're looking at the moment. I'll also take a look at the chat in a sec. But if we don't quite answer your question, feel free to elaborate in your question and answer, and we'll make sure we get back to it. We have another one. How does confidence in or disbelief in an afterlife impact aging well? It's also from Philip, so similar.
I really will have to say that one I don't feel confident answering. But I'd be happy to chat about it, Philip.
Okay, we'll get on to the next. And so thank you for the talk. It was really fascinating. It struck me that a lot of the protective activities are probably hard to do in lockdown, especially for people in retirement homes who are in really strict lockdown. Do you know if anyone is researching this impact, or if there are any ideas for how to keep our elderly population engaged and active during lockdown? Great question.
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Charlotte. That's an amazing question and a problem that we have no idea the impact at the moment. We don't have an idea. I'm not aware of whether research is happening to look at the impact, but it's a fascinating area. Michelle, you and I should talk. Part of the difficulty in assessing the impact is actually accessing the people to assess them. There are ideas for how to keep people engaged in terms of online activities and activities.
Like this one now.
Well, in fact, we can spruik a program that we are trying to we were on the cusp of starting before this lockdown now, of songwriting, online songwriting program that runs remotely, but with people in aged care and people at their own, living independently. I think the way to keep people engaged is through technology. I know we have this stereotype that older people don't know how to use technology. You will be very pleasantly surprised. Over 65s are the demographic that are picking up computer skills at a faster rate than any other demographic in Australia. So as family members engage, whether through phone or Zoom as much as possible, and I know that a lot of residential aged care facilities are very conscious of the problem and are trying to put activities that they can run internally. But it's something that we have to think about post-COVID, because that's not going to stop. It's going to happen again.
Okay, so we have quite a few more questions. You mentioned hypertension is a predictor for dementia. Is there any link between low blood pressure? I'm
not medically trained, so I will qualify my response with that. I don't think there is, but I haven't looked at that in more detail.
When it comes to the blue zones where longevity is found around the world, do talk about this research, social structures, walking, eating, Mediterranean diet. So I think we're talking about those special places around the world where people live long and well, not far from where you're originally from, Frini.
Yes. Look, at least in terms of the Mediterranean lifestyle or the, Southern European lifestyle, I hate to say there were, I don't know that there still are differences in the way that older people are integrated in society. And also differences in eating habits. So Mediterranean diet is now a big fad, I think very popular. But also there was a social structure where the older person was integrated, still is in many places, but not as frequently in urban settings in Mediterranean countries. Integrated into the family unit, looking after the kids, cooking for home, walking to school to pick up the kids, necessary activity that now is not done because parents and kids live far from each other.
Thank you. I'd love for more elaboration, if you can, about how learning another language might help keep your brain healthy. It makes a lot of sense. I've been trying to learn Spanish for years, but I wonder if there's a difference between learning it and speaking it regularly.
I don't know exactly about the last part of the question. I would think that learning is more, it's the learning aspect that makes the difference, but let me backtrack. Any deep learning that we do, such as learning a language, establishes new networks in our brain. So that white matter that we saw earlier, those white matter connections are what link different areas of the brain and allow us to do the complex type of activities we do, including speaking a language. The more of those activities we do, whether it's language learning, whether it's learning musical instruments, whether it's creating art, dancing, and the better we do them, the more well-established those networks become. Now, language learning is also very important because we have to keep two vocabularies active at the same time. And it is amazing how we actually can shift between those. I'm fully bilingual. My oldest son was more bilingual. Well, he's bilingual. But when he was young, he would shift between those two languages without even understanding he was doing it. And so, but at the same time, speaking the right language for the right context. So that engages our frontal lobes, that taxes our executive functions, and it builds that mental capital, cognitive reserve.
Does emotional health make physical changes on the brain and how it functions?
Most definitely. We're not a brain and a mind. We're not feelings, brain and mind. Our brain underlies everything we do. So our feelings impact our brain, our cognitive well-being impacts our brain, but also our brain can impact our feelings. So everything all we are is enacted through the brain. If we are emotionally low, then our reward centers of our brain are not activated or not engaged in the same way. And that can impact key neurotransmitters that are important in the brain's well-being.
Yeah, so I think it also speaks to that paper you presented where depression can be a risk factor for dementia, but depression can also have immediate impacts on the way you're thinking about things in your cognitive well-being. So it's sort of an immediate and long-term.
Exactly.
Has your research compared individuals with and without children or close family members locally or at all who can support them? And if yes, how does this impact their trajectory, healthy aging well pathway? So the close family.
Yeah, my personal research hasn't, but there is definitely research that has looked at the impact of social networks and social connectedness, and families clearly are amongst the strongest. There is some research that says having had children is protective against dementia, I think especially for women. I'd have to check that to qualify it. I don't know that anybody knows why. In fact, one of my ex-PhD students, Michelle Shana, is looking at the effects of pregnancy on outcomes in old age. So connectedness is very important, local connectedness is very important, and family is the best way to connect, I guess. We should go through the poll. I don't know how you guys have done the...
Yeah, I can put that poll up. I was just maybe going to jump to that last question then. Yep. So, are there countries, societies, cultures in the world where levels of dementia are much more lower than in Australia?
I know they vary across countries. I know there are countries with lower rates, and especially Mediterranean countries, countries that have less fast food diets, less highly processed diets. It used to be Japan, it used to be Mediterranean countries. I haven't followed that up to see if that's still the case.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to chuck the first poll results up. So
I'll just stop sharing.
Yeah, if you like. This is what does aging well for you mean? Okay.
The reason I wanted to, I put these up is both to sort of get you thinking and relating the content to your own current state, whether you're a younger person or an older person. I don't know who is in the audience, but also to come back to these questions, because there's an emphasis in society on living long. And I think that when you really ask people what matters for them and what one thing matters, you can see now in our people here and the people in the audience, remaining mentally fit and socially engaged is what matters. I had a conversation with a neurologist years ago about the importance of, you know, medicine and avoiding stroke and keeping healthy, keeping ourselves medically well, as opposed to the type of work that we do, which is more about improving quality of life and so forth. And the medico said, I can, you know, my work can save people's lives. And my response was, I really appreciate if you save my life if I have a stroke, but not if you're not going to be able to give me quality of life. And I think that's what we see here. We want to remain healthy and socially active. I'll close that, Michelle.
Yeah.
And please, if there's any chat about that or questions about that, we can go back to them.
Oops, hang on, wrong one.
I didn't even know you could say things.
So there was a question in the chat, are there more right answers to the poll questions? Keeping people in their own homes, etc. What's the research on that versus getting into retirement villages?
We might go through these and come back to that question at the end.
Yeah, we're just about out of time, Frini. So
okay. Look, we'll go through these quickly. It looks at the barriers, because we preach to people, do more of this, do more of that, engage more, go out more, but understanding that there are both physical health problems in this one and financial issues that keep us from doing activities is important, because that also helps our politicians and our social structures start thinking, how can we improve the outcomes? Because remember, high mental capital, low risk of dementia improves the country's budget as well as people's well-being. While Michelle's putting up the third one, in terms of whether there are wrong or right answers and retirement, there's some evidence that staying at home, in your own home, improves well-being, and many people prefer to do that. But it also depends on the conditions under which you are staying at home. Because if you're at home by yourself, sitting in front of the TV most of the day with visits from Meals on Wheels and a bit of NDIS care, then your quality of life is very poor. Going into a retirement village where you have the opportunity to engage with others without necessarily your independence being taken away may improve your quality of life. So it's really finding what is the best solution. If you're living at home and your family is living in the house next door, that would be optimal. Very, very interesting. I was expecting this to happen, that the access to local community services is amongst the most difficult issues here. And I'll bring your attention to the Hunter Aging Alliance, a new organisation that is headed by Julie Biles and John Ward. John's a geriatrician and Julie Biles is a university professor that's done ages of work in healthy aging, to bring together local government with local services, research and practitioners to improve local community services. And the last one, two more, I can't remember, I think one more.
This is the last one.
So what type of activities do you or would you? We've got a fantastic group here with 43% being physically engaged and 30% being community engaged. So that's fantastic, that's amazing. And I know that I invited a lot of our Activate participants in our current study, and they put us to shame in terms of the amount of, this is a group of 60 to 70-year-old people who often put us, myself, I'm about to turn 60, and younger research group to shame.
Speaking of that, Frini, there was a question in the chat that said, what do you do to keep your brain healthy?
I am deeply hoping that my level of education and extensive involvement in teaching and research, which is a lot of cognitive engagement, will keep my brain healthy. I do think that, and there is evidence that working with younger people, as I'm aging, but my students tend to, well, stay the same age, so relative to me, but the gap is becoming bigger. But I also do some physical activities. So I walk, I swim, well, I used to swim and I could get into the pools. And socially engage. For me, friendship is a protective factor.
Yeah. Okay, I think that is all our questions, and we have run out of time. So once again, I just want to say a huge thanks to Frini for speaking to us today on this very important and interesting topic. We had over 40 attendees, which is pretty good given we only got the word out in the last little while. For everyone who's here today, just to let you know, there is another webinar this afternoon at 3 o'clock. A speaker from BirdLife Australia, so a different topic, but for those who are interested in bird life, the environment, all of those things, or just have nothing else to do because it's a lovely Saturday in lockdown, please come and join us for that at 3 o'clock. I have also just put in the chat now a link to our website, which has on it all the National Science Week activities. So that includes all the talks. You can sign up to all our talks over the next couple of weeks there, but you can also check out there our online galleries. So we have 2 art science exhibitions, one on the topic of biodiversity called Biomes, and one on the topic of the brain. And you can check out our exhibitions there and let us know what you think of them. So thank you again for your attention this afternoon, and we hope to see you at some of our other talks.
Thanks, Michelle.
Michelle, can we just hang on for a sec, because a couple of people just wanted to know how to get on to the mistletoe talk this afternoon for birds. So I'll just try and put it in the chat. I'll just try and grab the link.
Yeah, cool. I just put the link for the actual website there, but I can add the link with talk after it. You just jump onto that link there. You'll see the second one down is the bird life talk at 3 o'clock this afternoon. So you can jump on there and register, and we'll see you very, very soon.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Thanks, Frini.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye, everyone.